What's up everyone? Good to see you. Today we are having a really cool lesson. We are putting together and rendering our 3D scene. I think that's something pretty satisfying to watch, even though we won't introduce any revolutionary new ideas. So with no time to waste, let's start. As a reminder, during the research there was one image we thought could be a really nice reference point for building the scene and overall composition. We like the rich spatial idea in this one. Action plays on the different levels, we have a large square market, we have the bridges, the towers. All of that will translate really nice into an interesting composition. We'll position the camera near the staircase, around the people. We'll have this personal experience of the crowd, but at the same time open the space to see how the scene looks like. Maybe we'll get lucky and have some mountains looming in the background. If not, that's fine. And as the last part, we'll surround this marketplace with our assets. That's the game plan. Okay, so this is pretty much the time-lapse of making the 3D scene. I'll give some additional nuggets of knowledge here and there. The very beginning is basically just juggling assets, arranging them in the space. We keep in mind our spatial ideas, which is pretty much not forgetting about different levels, descents, ascents, towers and all that. We also keep the realistic dimensions of everything. We can put a character or just something that anchors the dimensions. In our case, that was the stairs. And this is how the process looks like. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, sometimes it might take an hour. But it's best to do this very quickly to capture certain compositional frames. After we have some assets already placed in, we can put the camera. And here you can see that this is not a particularly big scene. It might seem extremely busy, but often it's the camera lens that gives us the perception of space. In case you are wondering, a good starting point might be a 25 or 30mm lens to capture semi-dynamic compositions. What's nice about this composition is that we can clearly read the path from the camera to any place in the image. We don't have sudden drops, we don't have objects covering the space. That works in our advantage, and that's something that's always nice to have, especially in your commercial work. Ideally, we would want to be able to follow the pixels with our eyes and just move from where the camera is positioned to any place in the scene. It makes any image easier to read and more immersive to the viewer to engage with your image. At some point, we see that the camera is really locked in. Spatial idea works, we have the clearing in the middle ground and plenty of space to fill in the foreground. And this is a perfect moment to see how lighting works with the composition. We took care of the geometry and now we need the lighting to go hand in hand with this composition. Lighting can make or break the composition, so we need to do a quick test and see if everything goes hand in hand. As you can see, we immediately put the familiar box behind the camera. This will put the foreground in the shadows and make the light hierarchy much more readable. And circling back to the light system. We used the native Corona Sun and Sky system. I think it's the best choice when doing concept art or R&D in general. You should be able to experiment and that gives you the power to do so. We add the volumetric effect to build a sense of depth. We set the sun direction from the back, which is a classic press play to win lighting scenario. We want to shed some light on the market and people in the foreground. You can see how that's looking. We really like how the sun rays are illuminating the right facade. One small problem we have right now is that the square looks a bit dull. But soon it will fill up and we'll also be able to add some light flares to give the impression that the marketplace itself is glowing, drawing attention. So we'll start on that shortly. Now we are just populating the scene. And you have to mentally switch the fact that it doesn't have that fidelity, it doesn't have that precise geometry. Often the faces are deformed, but that's not important because we'll add details later. You need to look at the raw geometrical potential, everything that we discussed when going through the reference. I think it is a good exercise to get into the way of thinking about images. Only the big moves matter. The activity, placement, that's what matters. We don't introduce huge changes to the lighting, but focus on smaller parts of the image. First we focus on the marketplace and try to add more light there. The logic is to have same intensity as the light on the right. It should feel like it's coming from the same lighting source, even though we are faking it. Technically, we are using a large disk or sphere, nothing too fancy. The most important thing is we just restrict the light to the marketplace and nowhere else. One cool tip I also want to share is that if your scene is difficult to do the lighting, remember you can create different suns and place them in various locations. In a scenario like this with many vertical elements, the sun might only illuminate one part of the image or architecture. And if we have a tough time illuminating the overside, we can actually exclude and include some objects and apply them to different suns. Moreover, even if a certain area is shining a bit too much, we shouldn't make any drastic changes to our sun at this point. Instead, you can cut off the light coming in. You can put any area in the shadows. That's what we are doing with those spheres. They work as a very simplistic clouds. We just darken parts of the towers that were grabbing too much attention away from the marketplace. Sweet. And here we are turning off the override material. So far we are working on a clay material and there was a good reason for it. You see, when we have all the texture visible, we might get distracted by the details and whatnot. So it's way easier to focus on the composition and lighting when everything is as simple as it can be. Now we can quickly fix the exposure and land in a similar value ranges as before. Moving on, we add a little bit of an ambient occlusion to our towers, just to make it more juicy. After upscaling, that little AO makes a difference between something super custom or super basic. At this stage, the scene already looks quite nice. But there's still a couple of things we need to pay attention to. We need to take care of the foreground. It's nice to have the feeling that objects are close to you, that you can feel them, that you can see they are near. Not to mention they help to communicate the depth of the scene. Thankfully, foreground is the place where we have the most creative freedom and we can do whatever we want here. We can juggle assets, we can add something in post. All tricks are allowed. In our case, we added the ribbons to make us more immersed in the scene, like they are literally above our heads. And apart from it, we make a mental note to add people in the foreground as soon as we start post-production. Moving on, you can see there's just minor changes and improvements at this stage. I hope you can see the top-down decision-making process. We focus on the spatial ideas, we put the camera and check if the slice of that reality is interesting. We confirm the composition with the lighting and proceed with fine-tuning everything, both in terms of lighting and additional geometry. Finally, we can just add more production value to the scene, just to make it more juicy. In our case, it just means to populate the scene a bit more, make it a bit more busy. It's a very low effort move, but it helps. It's quite funny because we literally had just a handful of people, but it's enough to really make the scene pop. You copy them in groups and you don't really need to think about it perfectly. And at this point, we're almost done, but there was a small problem. As we are progressing with the scene, it kind of struck us, there needs to be a hero of this story. We felt the scene lacked some kind of connection between the foreground and that architectural focal point. We spent this whole time doing research and haven't thought about it before. But that's fine, better late than never. So at this point, we just came up with a person standing on the stairs. Adding someone who will be a hero of this composition is such a classic move. Ideally, he should be holding a yak or something by its muzzle. And without giving it that much thought, we just grabbed a random ninja guy and threw him in here. And because he was in a T-pose, we broke his arms. So he looks like he's actually holding the reins of this yak and looking somewhere in the distance. We could actually go to Midjourney and curate a character that fits perfectly. Same as we did before in the Penthouse high fashion example. But we didn't want to stop the creative process, so we figured we'll replace and improve it in post. We just need to make the big moves and block out the story. And that's that. There will be lots of post-production, so you'll see how everything goes in the next lesson. But before that, I want to point out one last thing. We also rendered a ton of different passes, the same approach we did for the Tripo3D interior scene. We applied different textures to facades. Those are the textures we generated in the previous lesson. Those will be additional renderings we'll use in post-production. Or maybe we won't, who knows. We also applied some generic textures like sand. This is just something we might use or not in post-production again, we don't know at this point. But it's better to have them than not. And by the way, keep in mind that even if we transition into post-production, it doesn't mean 3D part is over. This process is very organic and we can always go back and re-render something, transplant parts of it. Okay, and this is what the final render looks like at this stage. In the next lesson, we'll turn it into this. One of the most fun lessons we've ever recorded, so don't miss out on it. See you there!